£125 optional final payment. Subject status to over 18s. Indemnities may be required. Conditions apply. Toyota Financial Services.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We're live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. U.S. equity futures at this hour are actually indicated higher for both the S&P and the NASDAQ. Dow is indicated down, but by less than 12 points, which is somewhat surprising, given that overnight the Dow futures had been indicated down by about 400 points. S&P futures had been down by more than 50 points on concerns about what would happen next between Iran and the United States. At this point, it looks like both sides seem to be indicating that they are not looking to escalate. We're waiting to hear more from the White House. We are expecting something later this morning. Of course, the latest on the situation in the Middle East. Late last night, Iran launched more than a dozen ballistic missiles at 2 coalition air bases in Iraq. President Trump tweeted in response, saying that he would make a statement this morning. We are still waiting for that. Joining us right now live from Beirut with reaction from the region, NBC's Chris Livesay. Chris, what can you tell us?
Good morning, Becky. Well, there's kind of several ways of looking at this. On the one hand, I mean, there was an attack, and that's never a good thing. It was on 2 air bases, as you mentioned. However, on the plus side, it was a conventional attack. It was symmetrical. In fact, we now have confirmation that there was advance warning. The Iraqi prime minister announcing that Iran actually telephoned in advance to say that this attack was on its way. Something, by the way, that the United States failed to do when it was launching its attack that killed Soleimani. So this is not the asymmetrical proxy warfare that you might expect from Iran. Remember, however, that Iran announced that this was how it intended to respond to the targeted killing of Soleimani. And so far, it seems to be maintaining this kind of PR high ground, announcing in advance what it's going to do and then following through on it. The risk is still there, however, and that's because of the proxies that might still feel like they need to save face. Proxies like Hezbollah here in Lebanon and other smaller proxies throughout the region. For instance, one issued a statement today in Iraq that's backed by Iran saying, okay, fine, Iran has gotten its revenge, but we still need to get ours. So it's still too soon to tell exactly how soon this tension will cease and if this conflict is really coming to an end. One thing I can tell you, however, is when you talk to regular people on the ground here, nobody really wants to go to war, especially in a place like Lebanon, where I am, where it's still going through a severe economic crisis. It's about $80 billion in debt, a massive amount of money for a country of this size. In recent days, there have been runs on the banks because people just don't have confidence in their savings anymore. There's even been an increase reportedly in burglaries, just again because of the desperation that you feel. So when you talk to people, they say no one wants to go to war, but do they feel like it's inevitable? Well, a lot of people still do. Becky?
Chris, I'm just trying to figure out, did you make some type of equivalency between the United States not telling Iran they were going to strike one of their main generals? Do you think that would have been possible in any way to make that equivalent to them saying that they are giving us some warning about striking our bases? I don't understand how that you're making some type of equivalency there.
Well, the facts are that Iraq was very upset that the United States didn't notify it that it was planning this attack, this targeted drone strike that killed Soleimani, and that's obviously made things very difficult in the region. Meanwhile, on its ground, exactly, on its territory.
But we couldn't, I mean, obviously we could not have, then it wouldn't have happened probably, right? I mean, we didn't even tell Congress.
Well, that's certainly not for me to decide.
Oh, right, okay.
It's certainly not for me to decide, but Iran, in its defense, it did reach out to Iraq and let it know, which shows you, again, the kind of influence and the kind of relationship that's, hot and cold, sometimes friendly between Iraq and Iran. It's one more sign of them exerting their influence in the region.
Right.
Chris, thank you. NBC's Chris Livesay.
Thank you.
Meantime, I want to get right to the reaction in the oil markets. Brian Sullivan is in Miami, where he spoke to some of the biggest names in the energy market at the Goldman Sachs Energy Conference. John Kilduff, founding partner of Again Capital and CNBC contributor, is also with us. We will start with you, Brian. What are you hearing?
What we're hearing is that the market is still oversupplied. I think if you're expecting terrible, Andrew, and you only get bad, I guess you could read that as good news, which is why oil spiked last night and then has kind of reversed course. The reality is that there is still a lot of oil out there in this response. Many are considering it measured. I think a couple of things to watch, and we'll see if John would agree with this. Number one, what will be the American response, if any? If any oil supply targets are targeted, then you can expect a move in oil prices. Remember, this was not that. Number two, will there be any closure of the Strait of Hormuz or tanker companies refusing to operate there? 20% of oil and about 25% of liquefied natural gas goes through there every day. And I think the one thing, guys, that not enough people are talking about with regard to this is the domestic response in Iraq. Remember, this is already a country that is politically fractured. In fact, an oil facility was shut down briefly last week because of protests outside. Iraq's at 4.6 million barrels a day. They're the second largest OPEC producer. They want to get to 6 million barrels of oil a day. If they can't get their internal politics in order, it's going to be very difficult to do that. I think that watch for any domestic disturbance inside of Iraq. If you get that on a meaningful level, perhaps led by Iran, trying to shake the tree, Joe, if you will, then you can see oil prices spike higher.
Hey, John, I want you to comment on that idea and the larger question about instability longer term in the Middle East, and whether, for example, if the U.S. gets pushed out of Iraq or gets pushed out of any other of the Middle Eastern countries that are seen as our proxy right now.
Well, we're hearing in the market that they're pulling out of Kuwait. Our soldiers are pulling out of Kuwait. That was just announced a little while ago. This is far from over in terms of the region. The asymmetric stuff is what likely comes next. And there's certainly a lot of worry, as Brian just noted, about transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. How realistic an attack there is or isn't is an open question. I think it's a low probability, but you know what? It's scary enough right now that some of the big tanker companies have said that they are going to avoid going and transiting through the strait. That's enough to potentially curtail some oil supplies, particularly out of Iraq, where really the bulk of that 4.6 million barrels flows from their southern Basra port facility. So that's the big thing. And again, we're hearing about potential hacks of the Kuwait news agency, likely by Iran. Again, this is a speculation morning, so that's the best we can do as far as pointing fingers. But look, the smoke cleared. Thank God none of our soldiers apparently weren't killed. And also, the oil continues to flow. So therefore, as long as the oil continues to flow, the security risk premium in prices is going to remain tempered.
Right, John. And I hate to ask you about prices when we're talking about lives, but when you look at WTI right now, and just sort of gaming out, I hate to say that too, but gaming out what may or may not happen in the Middle East based on what you just said, you look at WTI, it is where in a month from now? Actually,
the chart is suggesting that it'll go considerably lower. This is a technical failure of the first order in 2 straight sessions where we spiked to new highs on the current move and have fallen back. If we get a negative day today, if prices end up actually going negative, then that will invite technical selling in a big way. But the overhang, and now we're going into a slack demand period, it's downward pressure short of, again, oil facilities getting hit.
A quick final word to Brian.
Yeah, and let's not forget, in this market, guys, you got the U.S., which is about 12.8 million barrels. They could, if oil prices go up, we might see production rise in the United States. That's what we talked about at the conference yesterday. Brazil, they're increasing their production. And our good friend Norway, they have a new field in the North Sea already producing 350,000 barrels a day. That's expected to go up. The point is this: the risk-free oil in the world seems to be growing, while the risk-on oil in the world seems to be under threat. But unless global demand, guys, goes up, you're going to see a lot more oil out there.
Okay. Brian, John, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Let's get market reaction to Iran's strike. It was swift, with the Dow futures falling by more than 400 points overnight, but that has now completely reversed. Joining us right now to talk about the big move and then the move back is Ed Campbell. He's Senior Portfolio Manager at QMA. Also, Julian Emanuel, he's Chief Equity and Derivatives Strategist at BTIG. And Ed, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think we're all taking a collective sigh of relief this morning compared to the initial news last night, because Compared to the U.S. action, I think this does look like a de-escalation. It remains a dangerous situation, and we're going to have to watch it closely. Oil shocks caused by geopolitical crises have caused bear markets and recessions in the past, so the markets are going to be focused on that. But I think our base case here is that we're able to find an off-ramp, and things are not going to escalate to the point of a full-fledged conflict.
Julian, one of the things I'd heard speculated about is just the idea that this kind of proves that there was so much money waiting on the sidelines, because anybody looking for any sort of a pullback, if they sound like it's not going to be as dire as some of the early predictions, there are people who are willing to flood right back into the markets.
Well, there's definitely the element to that. And in fact, the market has been, for the most part, underinvested for almost the entire last year, since you had that bear market in the fourth quarter
even with the massive gains we saw last year?
Even with the massive gains. And, we've been on the show previously talking about how the hedging over the election term shows almost an apocalyptic view about election outcomes, which tells you that people are still holding back. You look at money market balances, you look at flows into bond funds. There is room to own equities. That having been said, the market volatility of the last several weeks has been probably a bit too low. Clearly because there's lots of risk out there, whether it's what we're facing over the last 12 hours, whether it's the ongoing politics in Washington, or the fact that there's questions around earnings. All of these are questions. But for us, I guess the question comes down to is there likely to be material escalation? The president's run on this idea that he doesn't want endless wars. And when you think about it, the coming into an election year, this whole idea of keeping consumer confidence high, which spurs growth, is central to an incumbent's getting reelected. And this is something that could be a threat to consumer confidence, which is why we think it'll get walked back.
Ed, a lot of the speculation yesterday, some of the market notes I was reading, had analysts saying, look, they were concerned about whether these two sides would be rational actors, even though neither one of them necessarily wants to get into a prolonged or more severe sort of conflict, that with Iran in the past, they haven't always been rational actors, and maybe the market was putting too much faith in that. Do you think that's the case or no?
Well, I think I'm going to assume that, we have rational actors here, and that, if you look at the incentive structure, no one wants to go to war. But I do think, there are situations where leaders miscalculate and, things could spin out of control. We're still overweight risky assets here. We don't plan to change that. I do think you want to boost.
What sort of risky assets?
Stocks.
Just stocks in general?
Stocks in general. High yield bonds and emerging market bonds relative to things like core bonds and international sovereign debt. So we don't plan to change that. I do think you want to boost your exposure to safe haven assets a bit here as a hedge. So gold has just broken out of, moved above its September high, and we think we have more upside there. So, gold and treasuries, so maybe a bit of a barbelled approach where, you have some exposure to safe havens in the event that, things do go sour. But, our view is that we're likely to have another good year in global equities.
All right. Ed, Julian, I want to thank you guys both for being here today. When we return, Carlos Ghosn speaking out in just about an hour's time. We will see if he provides answers to the many questions swirling about his 5,400-mile escape from Japan to Lebanon. First, though, we have you fully covered on the crash of a Boeing plane in Iran. Here's the reaction of Boeing shares right now, down by about 1.7%. We'll have more on this story when Squawk Box comes right back.
I used to be a bit of a rubbish sleeper. I'd toss and turn all night, and somehow I could never find the comfy bit of the mattress. It was a proper nightmare. That's what brought me here, testing mattresses in the Which Test Lab. We use a custom-made barrel rolling machine to simulate a decade's worth of use. And the mattresses that perform best are the only ones we recommend for your bedroom.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
Be better informed, be better prepared. The Better Network is on TuneIn. This is Brent Musburger. Search BETR and start hanging out with me and my guys in the desert weekday afternoons. The Better Network is now on TuneIn.
On the goal line, scores! It takes it home!
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
Here's Pietrangelo, he scores!
And you can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium.
Gonna move, hit a shot, he scores!
From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
When you're not listening to your team, take it to the end zone, the rim, or the net. Keep up with the biggest moments in sports by following TuneIn on social media.
Block, Cook into the end zone for the touchdown.
From reminders of the live top games to tips of the best sports stations and podcasts.
Welcome to Undisputed. We are live from Los Angeles. I'm Jenny Taft here with Skip Bayless.
Follow at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get the most out of TuneIn.
Hear every play of the NFL playoffs live with the NFL on TuneIn Premium. The divisional round kicks off Saturday at 4:35 p.m. Eastern when the Vikings travel cross country to take on the 49ers in an NFC showdown in Santa Clara. The action continues at 8:15 as the Ravens host the Tennessee Titans in Baltimore. On Sunday, listen live beginning at 3:05 Eastern as the Texans and Chiefs square off in Kansas City, followed by the Seahawks and Packers at 6 in Green Bay. The excitement of the NFL playoffs is on TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
A lot of people aren't aware that TuneIn lets you listen to the same terrestrial stations that you pick up on your FM AM dial, except you can hear them from anywhere. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
Breaking news, Iran retaliating overnight against U.S. forces over the killing of General Qassem Soleimani. Wall Street and Washington reacting this morning. We have complete coverage.
Boeing under pressure after a crash in Iran just hours after that missile attack. The stock down yet again as investors await more information on just what happened.
And Carlos Ghosn is ready to speak. His first public statement after his wild escape from Japan. We'll carry it live when it happens. The second hour of Squawk Box begins right now.
Good morning. Welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin along with Becky Quick and Joe Kernan. Take a look at U.S. equity futures at this hour as we try to assess what's taking place overnight in Iran and in Iraq, and also this Boeing plane that's gone down. We're going to talk about all of this in just a moment. The Dow looking like it would open off only about 29 points, about 30 points right now. NASDAQ actually looking to open up about 6 points higher. S&P 500 would open up 4 points higher. And we have some breaking news.
We do. This morning, we've got you covered with all this breaking news with full market reaction to the stories that will impact your investments. Eamon Javers is in Washington covering the White House and the president's response to late last night's missile attack by Iran. But first, a Ukrainian Boeing 737-800 crashed in Iran late yesterday. The passenger jet went down moments after takeoff just outside Tehran, killing all 176 people on board. Phil LeBeau joins us with more on that Boeing crash in Iran that took place just hours after the attack. Phil, what can you tell us this morning?
Becky, this Ukrainian Airlines flight was off the ground less than 2 minutes when it went down. That's a really unusual circumstance that is going to get a lot of attention. And whether or not we get answers from the black box, well, it may take some time. There are reports that Iran, which has discovered or found the black box at the crash scene, has said they will not be turning it over to Boeing or to American investigators. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't learn what's in the contents of the black box. There are other facilities around the world where the box could be sent, where they can analyze the data to see if there was, in fact, a mechanical issue. Did something unusual happen on the flight? That's the kind of information you would get from the black box, as well as the cockpit voice data recorder. So whether or not Iran turns those over or how quickly they turn those over, that will determine how quickly we get some answers about what happened with this flight. 176 people on board, 167 of them passengers, 9 crew members. This plane was delivered from Boeing. It's a 737-800. It was delivered from Boeing to Ukrainian International Airlines in 2016. So this is a young aircraft. The engines on board were built by the GE Safran joint venture, CFM. These are CFM 56-7B engines. There have been some reports that there appeared to be some engine problems or mechanical failures, but we should point out those early reports after an airplane crash, they are often wrong, and there's no indication at this point that this was due to mechanical failure at this point. And again, guys, the suspicious circumstances of the fact that this plane takes off just hours after there was the rocket attack from Iran to the U.S. air bases in Iraq, and the fact that we don't have any answers or may not get some answers from Iran, all of this adds to this level of suspicion about what exactly happened with this flight and why it went down.
Phil, thank you very much. All right, let's get to Washington and that Iranian missile attack. Here's what we know. Iran striking back at the United States for the killing of its top general. According to the Pentagon, the attack occurred around 5:30 p.m. Eastern time yesterday, with Iran launching more than a dozen ballistic missiles. Their target, 2 coalition air bases in Iraq where U.S. troops are stationed. One, the Al-Assad Air Base, one of the largest in the world and less than 200 miles from Baghdad. The other in northern Iraq, less than 100 miles from the Iranian-Iraqi border. Iran almost immediately claiming responsibility for the attack. That country's foreign minister tweeting that Iran took proportionate measures in self-defense under Article 51 of UN's charter, and that Iran does not seek escalation or war, but will defend itself against any aggression. That's what his tweet said. Eamon Javers joins us with the response from the White House this morning. Eamon.
Yeah, good morning, Becky. No word from the White House yet on what time we can expect to see the president make that statement about what happened in Iraq and Iran last night. We'll bring that to you as soon as we have it. And as serious a matter as this is, of ballistic missiles impacting U.S. bases in Iraq, launched from Iran, as you see this video from last night, what struck me, as we talked about a little bit last hour, is just how much of this is also a messaging battle. This video released by Iranian state television, these are the images the Iranians want the world to see about what they did last night. And then, of course, take a look at the tweet that went out shortly after this attack from Saeed Jaili. He's Iran's Supreme National Security Council secretary. He tweeted simply an image of the Iranian flag last night in response to this. And that, of course, mirrors the president's own tweet of an American flag with no commentary after the U.S. strike on Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general in Baghdad last week. So what you see here is a war of messaging and imagery as much as it is a war of ballistic missiles going back and forth, each side trying to play to an international and domestic political audience, making the case that it's doing the right thing. Now we'll watch to see what the president has to say later on today. If it is the case that there were no casualties here, we don't know that for certain yet. If that is the case, the president's tone here will help set the stage for the next round of this, whatever that may be. So far, no American military response to the events last night, and we'll see what the rhetorical response is later on today, guys.
All right, Eamon, thank you. I don't think we've talked to anyone yet in the government, so we're pleased to have Congressman Doug Collins join us now. Also, Judiciary Committee ranking member. Congressman, thanks for joining us. You get filled in on things that we may not know anything about. Can you add anything to the events of the last 24 hours? Give us some insight.
Well, I think the biggest insight we have is we expected a response. That was not anything that anybody would have not expected from Iran. I mean, the good part about it is it does appear at this point there were no casualties. This seems to be a response in which they sent missiles over into certain areas in which in some ways it seems like they actually telegraphed what they wanted to do. But I think it's important here to notice that Iran wanting to, as your reporter just said, wanting to appear as a equal to the United States on the international stage. Well, there's a problem here. Iran is not the equal to the United States on the international international stage. Iran is a terrorist state who does terrorist activities. To quote the UN Charter as the reason that they actually responded was sort of a joke, in considering how they actually respond in the Middle East, and especially their reaction to Israel and the other partners in that area. This is just a situation in which a state has isolated itself from the world. The response that the president did was very proportional and very basically muted. Even though we took out Soleimani, he had been very patient over the last year with Iran, and I think we're just seeing that come to a head right now. And I think the president's acting in a very patient, mediated way.
Do you think when the president says all is well, what does he mean by that? That all is well on the bases, or all is well in keeping this conflict where it is right now, and neither side could be expected to accelerate from here?
I think the answer could be yes to both. I think it's not as all as well with our bases. I think that our troops, and having served in Iraq in 2008, this is a very unstable region in which there is a lot of activities and a lot of hostilities that go on during this time. But I think what he basically meant is that all is well. Our bases are secure. Our folks were on heightened alert. They took precautions that they needed to, and also the simple fact that we're going to continue to stand firm in our resolve in what we're doing. And I think it just simply says to Iran that you're not going to intimidate us. We're not a country that you're going to push around, that we're going to stand firm. And this president has made it very clear that he will be patient up to a point, but he will act. He doesn't draw red lines that he has no intention of keeping. But he also doesn't telegraph them either. And I think that's what makes this administration a little different.
Congressman, there's a lot of people on the left, and maybe even some in your party, that at least they are presenting a narrative that we didn't need to get here, that, he was a bad guy. Everybody agreed with that. The Obama administration designated Soleimani as a terrorist, but they had opportunities to do this and decided that the unforeseen consequences, the loss of life on both sides wouldn't be worth doing it. Do you think that something in recent weeks pushed that up to where it made sense to do this, even though there could be this type of outcome now?
Well, it is sort of amazing to me, my friends on the left who are now upset about this and talking about the possible consequences. It's amazing how the whole country came together, that when Osama bin Laden was killed, both left and right came together to recognize that taking out a terrorist was something that you did that was appropriate. I think the interesting part here is that in this taking out, it was not just something that just came out of the blue. This was an escalating event from Iran over the past year, with issues in the Straits of Hormuz and other things in Iraq, and the terrorist activities that they're supporting in Syria and other places. But remember here, it is amazing for those on the left to criticize this. I would just ask them, what would they say to the Gold Star families here in the United States who lost family members because of what Soleimani had been doing over the years? What would they say to those veterans right now who are at Walter Reed and other places who lost limbs and arms because of what he did providing the IEDs in Iraq and how he went about that terrorist campaign? Look, at this point in time, Soleimani was a terrorist. Soleimani was killed. Soleimani is put in the history books, and now it's time for us to move on. If Iran wants to actually take part in the world stage as a true world participant, then they've got to release their terroristic activities and quit being a nation that is backward looking and start looking forward and be a part of the world stage.
We'll return to this, but you were front and center during the impeachment hearings, obviously, as a ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. What can you tell us about what Senator McConnell has started today? Is it possible to start a trial without the articles being delivered?
Well, I don't think it's going to be a start of a trial without articles being delivered. But here's a question that's not being asked. Why is Nancy Pelosi being allowed to get away with this statement? She says, I'm not going to send the articles over until I know what they're going to do, so I'll know who to pick as my folks that I need to be the prosecutors or the folks from the House as far as her team to go over and execute this trial. This is the case. They've made their case. They had their hearings over here. We believe them to be a sham, is what they said. They are now, I believe, ashamed of what they did over here. And to say that she doesn't know who to put on the team to go over as managers from the House is simply ridiculous. She should be held accountable to say, you have a body of work. This is a case. You've made your case. You sent the articles over. You did it before the House. To tell us that she's trying to figure out who to send over is a joke. It is a sham. And she should be ashamed of herself right now. And the press ought to be holding her accountable for that, because this is not go have a new trial and we'll decide who to send over then. No, you've made your case. Now go defend it. If you don't defend it, then, you've told the American people this is nothing but a political stunt to get at this president.
Do you see any cracks developing in, I've heard about Murkowski, I've heard about Susan Collins, I've heard, and John Bolton's ready to testify. But I watched the predicted the futures, and nothing's moving on the possibility of a conviction in the Senate. How is this going to? When is this going to be over? There's a potential war starting. I mean, is this ever going to be in the rearview mirror, or can you leave this? Can it be evergreen for the Democrats right up to November?
Well, they want it to be because they have nobody to run against President Trump in November. But I think the problem here is it's up to Nancy Pelosi. It's time for the media to start asking Nancy Pelosi, you have no excuse. Send them over. This is not a trial that you did. You have already made your case. Name your managers and send it to the Senate. But it is interesting that Murkowski and Collins and all these names keep getting brought up in the media. They actually come out and said they support Mr. McConnell's view that we should take the Clinton impeachment rules and begin this trial. There's no cracks developing. In fact, we all know how this is going to end. Let's just go ahead and get it done. Let's go ahead and let the president make his case, let the Democrat managers make their case, and then settle it and be done with it and move on with what the American people care about, and that's more themselves, not us.
Okay.
Congressman, I was actually going to pivot back to the Middle East and just try to get your sense of where you think of sort of the larger implications, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, and some of what are considered sort of proxy countries or allies, whether you think we're going to stay there, whether we're going to get forced out, how this is going to change the dynamic or not.
Yeah, I think I think the balance that the president has tried to strike with small forces that are able to do things that we need to do in the region and prepare for, what is a supportive role in that region has been a good thing. And I think we'll continue to see that pull back, but also be very strategic in what we do. Remember, our military is the best in the world. We don't need, as other countries do, a lot of people to carry out what we can do with very few people. And I think that is our role in this area, is being that stabilizer. Because after this week, we have now reasserted the fact that Iran, you're not going to be able to just unilaterally do whatever you want. You're not going to have your lead terrorists go over and stir up stuff in Syria and Iraq. And remember, there's one thing we didn't mention earlier. From last week before Soleimani was killed, we remember they attacked sovereign American soil. This is something we have to be aware of. You don't get to attack embassies the way that they did, and with Soleimani being in the background of that, and not pay a price for it. So I think there's been a balancing and a stabilization in the region that America is now looked upon again as a player, but not in a player in which we're sending massive troops. That's not something we need to do. I think our role there now is providing the stability for the region that needs to be there.
Congressman, you don't see tensions escalating from here, that sounds like then?
At this point, we'll see. I think frankly, this is in the Iranians' hands. The Iranians have been pushing this for a year. This is a story that's not been told a lot. If you look over the past year, whether it be in the Straits of Hormuz, whether it be in the terrorist activity in Syria, really the taking over of influence in Iraq with their government, you start looking at this. This was something that the president actually showed great restraint on. And so I think what we're seeing here is now, when he made his statement, when he said we're going to do this, they attacked with the missiles and the base where our contractor was killed. Then they took out Soleimani. I think the escalation now is at a part where Iran really has to take stock in the world and say, really, what do we want to do here? And I think that's the part we're at. So I do believe that this is going to be maybe a calming period, and maybe we can move on from there. Maybe Iran realizes that they may have to change their ways as well.
All right, Congressman Collins, thanks. We appreciate you being on today. See you later.
It's good to be with y'all. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Okay, coming up, we are now just less than an hour away from Carlos Ghosn's first major public appearance since escaping from Japan. These are live pictures outside the building in Beirut, where he's going to be answering questions from the media. We're going to bring you his comments in full reaction. Squawk Box returns right after this.
Fitness enemy number one. So don't just run. Run, run. Mix it up. Skip, run, skip, run. Give yourself a lift. Mix it up. Lift. Mix it up. Run, lift. Splash. Skip, lift, run. It's crunch time. Skip, mix it up. Run, mix it up. Add a boxing class. Skip, run. Splash. Skip, run. Mix it up at Virgin Active and get stronger, fitter, faster. Join now for 12 months and pay nothing in January. T's and C's apply. Run, mix it up, skip, mix it, run. Mix it.
From dancing through the streets to the pulsing heartbeat in Brazil, to heading out on a safari in South Africa, or exploring the cultural delights of China. Wherever in the world you want to be, you can get there from your doorstep with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. Book your dream deal at klm.com by January 21st and fly via Amsterdam from a choice of 16 UK airports. Make your dream a reality with KLM.
Hairy Bikers here. This message goes out to something very special.
Yes, we're talking to you, chicken.
Maybe we've been seeing too much of each other.
But times have changed, Dave.
We've been cheating on meat.
Thing is, no stocks make veggie dishes so irresistible that cheating on meat is proper tasty.
Our dear chicken, you were the fire in my life, but it's all about you now, aubergine katsu curry. Prepare to be wined and dined, my love.
Cheat on meat with no veggie stocks.
Here at Tesco, we're celebrating over 100 years of great value, with even more great prices that take you back. Like a 500-gram tub of Anchor Salted Spreadable from £3.50 to just £2. All this week at Tesco.
Selected largest stores subject to availability. Offer ends 14th of January.
You know what it's like when you can't find your debit card? Panic. That's what it's like. Until you realise, as a Halifax Visa debit card holder, that you can freeze your card on the spot. Control your Halifax Visa debit card with the Halifax mobile app. Easy as.
You can only freeze certain transaction types. Terms and conditions apply.
We are less than an hour away from hearing from Carlos Ghosn, the man who went from being one of the world's best-known businessmen to an international fugitive. He is set to hold a news conference inside this building that you're looking at right now in Beirut. That event is expected to begin around 8 a.m. Eastern Time. It's the first time we'll be hearing from him publicly and freely since his arrest in Japan in 2018 and his subsequent escape to Beirut, where he is now. Philip O joins us right now for more on what to expect and also what's at stake for the former auto titan. Lots of questions that are going to be asked. What do you expect we'll hear, Phil?
Becky, I expect we hear vintage Carlos Ghosn. That means very fiery, very impassioned in terms of saying, look, where I was held without any chance of talking publicly, without a chance to defend myself. My only option was to escape Japan, to come here, and now I'm going to clear my name. So what can we expect during this press conference? First of all, he is going to be proclaiming his innocence vehemently. You will hear it time and again from him. He is going to blame his Nissan enemies for essentially setting him up so that he could be taken down in Japan and held without any chance of talking publicly so that they could essentially do a coup on his leadership at Nissan Renault. He is going to avoid escape details. You're not going to hear him talk in detail about, hey, I went from this place to this place to this place. We already know many of those details from our investigation as well as other reporters around the world. And just to recap, remember, he was being held under house arrest in Tokyo. He gets on a bullet train, goes 300 miles to Osaka, stays in a hotel or waits in a hotel where then he is ushered over to an executive airport in Osaka, takes an executive flight to Turkey, and then when he's in Turkey, he then is shifted to another business jet. $350,000 is what we understand was the cost of essentially leasing these two jets, though only $175,000 was paid. We don't know who paid that money. There is this footage, and I want to show this footage that came out overnight. Security camera footage. Now, it's not real good, but you see those two figures moving there? One of those is believed to be Carlos Ghosn, where he's being walked from one business jet over to another business jet. Do we know for sure that it is him? No, but this is security camera footage obtained by Reuters that was released overnight. Also overnight, there's this footage out of Tokyo of police in Japan raiding the office of Carlos Ghosn's attorney. This is the office where Carlos Ghosn would be visiting on a fairly regular basis. The question for the investigators is, Carlos Ghosn says he arranged this all himself. Well, if that's the case, where did he do it? Did he do it at the lawyer's office? Did the lawyer have any indication at all? That, by the way, that is his attorney right there. And finally, there is a statement from Nissan. It is not going to wait and listen to Carlos Ghosn blast the company and basically claim that there was a coup. The Nissan putting out a statement saying the internal investigation found incontrovertible evidence of various acts of misconduct by Ghosn, including misstatement of his compensation and misappropriation of the company's assets for his personal benefit. Guys, this is the beginning of Carlos Ghosn versus Nissan and the Japanese government. And Ghosn is going to sit there and blast them, and these guys are going to fire back. This is the beginning of what we'll see not only today, but for weeks and months to come.
Okay, Phil, stay where you are. I want you to be part of this conversation. But for more on what's at stake for Carlos Ghosn, I want to welcome attorney Ted Simon to the conversation. Ted, given that this is now in the court of public opinion, if nothing else, what does a win look like?
Well, I think it's going to start, or Mr. Ghosn is going to start today. As you know, he chose to go to Lebanon, and it appears that he chose quite correctly for a number of reasons. One, there is no extradition treaty between those two countries. And because of that, that gives us a degree of safety. But moreover, Lebanon also protects its own nationals, of which he is, from extradition. So on those two bases, he has significant safety to remain in Lebanon. I would add, curiously, I'm sure Japan is going to do everything they can to try to get him back. But Japan's own internal laws protect their nationals from being extradited. So if the shoe was on the other foot, Japan, in all likelihood, will not give up its national. So he has chosen quite correctly. No lawyer would be part of any escape plan, and I'm concerned about the search of his attorney's offices, which you just reported.
But Ted, how would you? Okay, if you don't believe any lawyers were involved in this whatsoever, how could something like this have happened?
Well, he clearly had assistance. I doubt he would be able to manage all this on his own.
Well, there were reports that there were 20 individuals involved, and that they were traveling in and out of Japan in this sort of Ocean's 11 style planning for 6 months or something of that sort.
Yeah, I would await whether or not there's any evidence of this. I think the more curious things that are going to happen is, he's going to be speaking this afternoon, I guess within an hour, and I can expect that you're going to see a full tour de force offense by him, an explanation of a parade of horribles that ranges from unfairly charged, wrongly charged, unfairly accused, unfairly prosecuted, wrongly prosecuted, and a compilation of what he'll claim to be a violation of his human rights, individual rights, substantive rights, procedural rights, and probably he'll even invoke that there was a disparate treatment between how he was treated and his and Sakawa. So I think you're going to be strong. I think you're going to find strong comments, conclusory statements of why he was unfairly treated, and probably light on details.
Okay, Phil, what do you think the long-term strategy is in terms of what Carlos Ghosn or the Ghosn family would think would be a win?
Well, they would love to salvage his reputation, but the question becomes, in what capacity? Because after this press conference today, Andrew, and we'll hear the Japanese government fire back. Look, do I think that the Japanese government, and this is just my personal thought, do I think that the Japanese government wants to get into a protracted battle where they publicly keep this out there? No, I think what they'll eventually do is they'll say, well, he's still charged, he's still a fugitive, but are they really going to pursue it? Probably not. So then the question becomes, if you're Carlos Ghosn, after you give this press conference, and he'll do some one-on-one interviews, there may be an in-depth, long-form interview that he does with a 60-minute style program. After he does that, then what? And it gets to your point, Andrew, what's the win here for him? Will he be able to salvage that reputation? I don't know, because I think at the end of the day, I think most people will think Carlos Ghosn, the great escape. They will not think about whether or not Carlos Ghosn is guilty or innocent of the charges in Japan.
And he can't travel. I mean, we've talked about sort of different countries. France, there's no extradition, so maybe if he wanted
He can. His wife can.
Right.
She's a U.S. citizen.
That's what I was going to say. The wife
can't. There is an extradition treaty with the United States, which that's the way Japan is kind of ratcheting up.
So how limited? I mean, is his? I don't want to call it a prison. Is his new prison Beirut or Lebanon?
Well, clearly his safest place is to remain in Lebanon, not only because there's no extradition treaty, but because they protect their own nationals. Don't forget, France is also investigating him for other allegations, so therefore it wouldn't be wise for him to go to France either. It wouldn't be a question of being extradited to France. It'd be a question of being arrested there for other charges. So I would introduce one other thing that's possible. In Lebanon, they have a provision that if they don't extradite, because they protect their own nationals, there's a provision that they can be tried on those foreign offenses in Lebanon. It will be interesting to see if he seeks to invoke that possibility, whether it's a possibility, and say, look, you want to try me fairly, try me in Lebanon, and if he's successful there, he'll have the opportunity to later travel through the world and claim double jeopardy or autrefois acquit.
Well, but doesn't Japan have to agree to cooperate in that trial? I mean, what if he says, try me in Lebanon, and Japan comes back and says, oh, no. You don't get to call the shots. We're trying you here.
Well, the point is that he's just not doing a publicity campaign. He's invoking that he is actually innocent and giving them that opportunity. I think it's going to remain to be seen how that tug of war plays out and whether or not he actually invokes. My feeling, that has not been fully vetted, and I think he largely will provide conclusory statements that he was wrongly prosecuted, he was unfairly treated by an unfair system, and he was not fleeing justice, but rather had to avoid a certain injustice.
I got a 30-second. I got a question, but I have only a 30-second answer that I can get here. Greg Kelly, who is his colleague, who is still in Japan, what kind of jeopardy has he put him in?
Well, it's pretty clear the stakes have gone up. One, they brought charges against his wife, which are very suspect based on the timing alone. They've searched the lawyer's office, so I expect they'll take out additional retribution, if you want to call it that, or at least become more aggressive against him, and that's a sad part. Okay. Hopefully, Ted, he will receive fair treatment.
Right. Ted, we appreciate your perspective this morning, and thank you so very much, and we'll be out with Phil talking to you all morning, so thank you.
When we return, continuing coverage of today's major developing story, Iran firing missiles at multiple bases housing U.S. troops in Iraq. The factors at play and what global investors need to know. Squawk Box will be right back.
Time now for today's Aflac trivia question. When did the U.S. national debt reach $0 for the first time? The answer when CNBC Squawk Box continues.
Coach Saban convinced us.
Start hearing more of what you want. Upgrade to TuneIn Premium and get over 45 commercial-free music stations, live commercial-free news, and every live NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL game. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour, but we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
A lot of people aren't aware that TuneIn lets you listen to the same terrestrial stations that you pick up on your FM AM dial, except you can hear them from anywhere. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
Hear every play of the NFL playoffs live with the NFL on TuneIn Premium. The divisional round kicks off Saturday at 4:35 p.m. Eastern when the Vikings travel across country to take on the 49ers in an NFC showdown in Santa Clara. The action continues at 8:15 as the Ravens host the Tennessee Titans in Baltimore. On Sunday, listen live beginning at 3:05 Eastern as the Texans and Chiefs square off in Kansas City, followed by the Seahawks and Packers at 6:40 in Green Bay. The excitement of the NFL playoffs is on TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today. Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards, at the goal line, it's intercepted!
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught. It is in for the right side for the touchdown to Keenan.
Search NFL today.
Black trivia question. When did the U.S. national debt reach $0 for the first time? The answer, January 8th, 1835.
Good morning and welcome back to Squawk Box. I'm Dominic Chu with this morning's market movers. First of all, check out what's happening with Walgreens Boots Alliance. Those shares are down about 4% right now, roughly 31,000 shares of pre-market volume. The drugstore chain and pharmacy benefits manager reported quarterly profits and sales that both fell below expectations. Walgreens was hit by higher costs like those incurred when it bought stores and locations from Rite Aid. So those shares off 4%. Next up, you got shares of Lennar, which are higher by about 2% or so, plus at this point, roughly 12,000 shares pre-market volume. This is America's second biggest home builder. It reported profits and sales that both beat analyst estimates, helped along by lower mortgage rates, boosting demand for homes. Also, future homes orders rose by over 23%, so those shares up 3%. And then we'll end on MSC Industrial, which is down about 1% or so on very thin pre-market trading volume. The distributor of metalworking tools and machinery reported slightly better than expected profits and sales, but the company did say it saw broad-based weakness in industrial demand and gave a more conservative forecast for the current quarter, so those shares off 2.5%. Keep it right here. We'll have more Squawk Box coming up right up after the break.
Yeah, I consulted with your grandmother's doctor.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards, at the goal line, it's intercepted!
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught. It is in for the right side for the touchdown to Keenan.
Search NFL today.
When you're not listening to your team, take it to the end zone, the rim, or the net. Keep up with the biggest moments in sports by following TuneIn on social media.
Block, Cook into the end zone for the touchdown.
From reminders of the live top games to tips of the best sports stations and podcasts.
Welcome to Undisputed. We are live from Los Angeles. I'm Jenny Taft here with Skip Bayless.
Follow at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get the most out of TuneIn.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour, but we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
The NBA is on TuneIn Premium.
Pointer by Anthony Davis. That's good!
Each week, TuneIn picks an NBA game you just can't miss. 2 of the top teams in the Western Conference go head-to-head. This Sunday, the Clippers are at the Nuggets. Tip-off is at 8 p.m. Eastern.
3 ball on the way. He got it to go! 3 from the angle. Got it!
Search NBA to follow your favorite NBA team today.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
On the goal line, scores! It takes it home!
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
Here's Pietrangelo, he scores!
The action live on TuneIn Premium.
Move, and a shot,
from regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
Welcome back to Squawk Box this morning right here on CNBC. We've got some breaking news right now. Iran retaliating against the U.S. forces in Iraq. Here's what we know. The missile attack occurred around 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time yesterday, with Iran launching more than a dozen ballistic missiles. Their target, 2 coalition air bases in Iraq, where U.S. troops are stationed. One, the Al-Assad air base, one of the largest in the world, and less than 200 miles from Baghdad. The other, northern Iraq, less than 100 miles from the Iranian-Iraqi border. Iran almost immediately claiming responsibility for the attack. The country's foreign minister tweeting that Iran took proportionate measure in self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, and that Iran does not seek escalation or war, but will defend itself against any aggression. We're going to have a lot more on this developing story in just a few minutes. The big story, though, impacting markets this morning, which is Boeing. Shares sliding after Ukrainian Boeing 737-800 crashed moments after takeoff just outside of Tehran, just hours after that Iran launched its missile attack. Now, 176 people were on board. Authorities believe that there are no survivors. The Ukrainian president says he has instructed his prosecutor general to open criminal proceedings over the crash. Boeing is also conducting its own investigation. All of this shaving about 32 points off the implied open. Futures are also lower at this hour.
Boeing just can't get out of the line of, well, we don't want to use that analogy, but things keep buffeting the shares, right? For more on Boeing and the market impact, we're joined by Mike Santoli, Peter Bookvar, Chief Investment Officer with Bleakley Advisory Group, and a CNBC contributor, and Sheila Kayaglu. She is aerospace and defense analyst at Jefferies, who covers Boeing so many times it seems like, okay, it's washed out. Boeing, time to start buying. Is that date ever going to come? And what happened in the past 24 hours? How does that impact your investment decision?
I think it's too early to tell. I'm not sure. It's a 737 NG that crashed, so it's not related to the MAX at all. There's 6,500 737s flying out there, about a quarter of the world's fleet. There's been 10 accidents since the aircraft entered service in 1997, and 8 of which have been very fatal, and none of them were engine failures. So it's a little bit too early to tell how this accident is related to Iran, but clearly, the 737 has a very good track record.
Sometimes I wish we could just say everything, but it's irresponsible. But there's so many things swirling around, even at media outlets, maybe not entirely reputable, about what is actually happening here. But I'm basically hearing 2 things. Number one, there have been some technical issues with some of these engines in the past that have been identified, and it's not totally out of the realm of possibility that this actually was engine failure within 2 minutes of taking off. The second one is that it's very rare at 2 minutes and with the flight patterns that we saw for this to have been a technical malfunction. There's conjecture that in a shooting war, or where you might be expecting something incoming, there could be anti-aircraft mistakes. There could be a lot of drones in the area, either Iranian drones or U.S. drones that wouldn't show up on radar. There's all kinds of conjecture swirling around. We don't know anything. Do you have a...
I don't think anyone knows anything, but of the 8 to 10 fatal accidents that have happened with the 737 NG, none of them have been engine failure. So the NG has a fairly good track record. It flies 25% of the global fleet. It's very different than the MAX. It's a slightly different aircraft. So I think it's hard to blame this on the 737.
The 8 crashes that you're referring to, is the implication they were all pilot error?
There's a list of reasons why the aircraft crashed, but none of them, as we looked up this morning, were engine failure, as or
related to the
Iranians are referencing. Yeah.
In your 30 years doing this, Mike, or whatever it's been, we always talk. We never know, and speculation never works out. But we can't help ourselves sometimes. Your Twitter feed, you see what's happening. What do you have any
in terms of the
probabilities in terms of what brought this jet down?
No probabilities. I think the market in its mercenary way is kind of saying this does not seem like, from what we know now, it impacts the comeback timetable for the MAX. Honestly,
even though the stock's down.
I just feel like that's the only way I can infer from the modest decline in Boeing after all it's gone through this year, that is the conclusion. And of course, you have this massive range of possibilities as to what could have happened.
Right, and it's not the MAX, so it may have nothing to do with it. But if there was a reason to think that there was a problem systemically with these engines on the 737-800, that would be a problem. But there's no
Sure, but how many are in service for a very long time? And it doesn't seem as if it's necessary. I mean, look, the market cares about the forward order book much more than the performance of planes that have been around a long time.
All right. You're a great conspiracy theorist. Do planes that, right in the middle of a war zone, just fall out of the sky 2 minutes after taking off?
I mean, it's a little suspicious, but I mean, I'm no expert when it comes to Boeing. With Boeing, you wonder with the MAX is what's the earnings power of this business? I mean, it's really difficult to pinpoint, right, over the next couple of years.
So, I think we get $275 on our discounted free cash flow model if we assume the MAX never gets back in the air. But I think what's important is the NG carries 25% of the global fleet. You ground the NG, then all of a sudden you have air traffic slowing and it becomes a big economic impact globally. So I think you want to be cautious given the aircraft track record over the last 23 years has been very solid to run to any conclusion.
Okay, so the other news this week, a debt issuance because free cash flow is going to be negative at Boeing. Any of that weigh into your 275 worst case scenario? Or?
I think the credit rating is still solid. Boeing likes to keep about $10 billion in cash on the balance sheet, so it's no surprise, given where they are with their liquidity position, that they're looking to raise $5 billion or so of debt.
Boeing's a very big constant issuer, right? It's not as I thought this story was a little bit elevated beyond what it should have been because they have maturities coming. They're obviously going to pad the cash balance, and they already have $20 billion in debt outstanding. So.
But I'm wondering, the same day that the Buffett rumor hit and they want to raise money, I'm wondering whether there's a financing potential there.
Or people connecting
Buffett
the
rumor's
dots.
a rumor.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. A lot more coming up on Squawk Box this morning. We've got continuing coverage of this morning's market-moving news from Iran to Washington to Beirut. And that is where Carlos Ghosn is getting ready to make his first public appearance since sneaking out of Japan, fleeing really, after his arrest. These are live pictures inside that room, and we're going to bring you his comments when they happen. Squawk returns right after this.
Fitness enemy number one. So don't just run. Mix it up, skip, run, skip, run. Give yourself a lift, mix it up, lift, mix it up, run, lift, splash, skip, lift, run. It's crunch time. Skip, mix it up, run, mix it up. Add a boxing class. Skip, run, splash, skip, run. Mix it up at Virgin Active and get stronger, fitter, faster. Join now for 12 months and pay nothing in January. T's and C's apply. Run, mix it up, skip, mix it, run. Mix it.
Here at Tesco, we're celebrating over 100 years of great value with even more great prices that take you back. Like a 500-gram tub of Anchor Salted Spreadable from £3.50 to just £2. All this week at Tesco.
Selected larger stores subject to availability. Offer ends 14th of January.
Did you know your favorite radio stations are in your pocket? Yes, the TuneIn app lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio anywhere you want. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
Next time you look up at the stars, think about this.
Inside you are the remains of a stellar explosion. You are made of stardust. And without the stars, there wouldn't be us.
I'm Guy Raj, the wonders of the universe and the people who still look up every night. Next time on the TED Radio Hour from NPR. You can subscribe to the TED Radio Hour on TuneIn.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
The NBA is on TuneIn Premium.
Pointer by Anthony Davis. It's good!
Each week, TuneIn picks an NBA game you just can't miss. Two of the top teams in the Western Conference go head-to-head. This Sunday, the Clippers are at the Nuggets. Tip-off is at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Three ball on the way. He got it to go! Three from the angle. Got it!
Search NBA to follow your favorite NBA team today.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards at the goal line. It's intercepted.
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught. It is in for the right side for the touchdown to Keenan.
Search NFL today.
Welcome back to Squawk Box, the consumer tech industry's biggest conference underway this week in Las Vegas. And Julia Borston is at CES with a very special guest and friend of the program this morning. Julia.
Good morning to you, Andrew, and thank you. I'm joined now by David Zaslav, the CEO of Discovery. Thanks so much for waking up so early this morning in Las Vegas.
I definitely saw a different side of Las Vegas walking through the casino at 2:30 in the morning.
So before we get to the news of CES and everything going on with Discovery, first, I want to hear your reaction to all of the news and Iran's retaliation. What do you think this will mean for the economy, for consumer spending, and for potential implications for your business?
You know, I'm really a down-to-the-core media guy, but what happened in Syria and the challenges related to immigration has been a real challenge for all of Europe. And it's you're dealing with as you look across Europe over the last 15 years, it's been basically zero GDP growth, and you add on top of this the immigration issue, and it's created challenges. We've been able to grow our international business despite that, but it's created challenges. It's also had a real impact on politics as you look across Europe. It's really it's created a lot of dissension, and you see a lot of the governments going either hard right or socialist. And so it's not my area, but it's certainly, to the extent that there's real conflict, it creates real challenges for what we're looking for, which is people to have more time to enjoy content and for the economy to grow. We're seeing a great economy here in the U.S., seeing a great ad sales market here in the U.S. But despite that, we had our best year ever last year. When we did the Scripps deal 18 months ago, we were generating about $2.1 billion in free cash flow between the two of us, and we said that our goal was over a couple of years to generate $3 billion in free cash flow. 18 months later, I'm happy to announce that we generated in 2019 over $3 billion in free cash flow, and we bought back about $650 million worth of stock, paid back over $4 billion worth of debt, and we went from 4.8 times levered to about 3 times levered. So we have a super healthy company that's generating massive free cash flow, really diversified around the world, and Scripps was a home run, and the fact that we own our content in every language around the world is really paying dividends for us.
Now, since we last did an interview in October, Disney Plus launched, Apple TV Plus launched, we've gotten more details on HBO Max, and now NBC Universal is getting ready to launch Peacock. The landscape has changed. How do you see all these players impacting your direct-to-consumer businesses and providing more competition?
Sure. We've been at direct-to-consumer for the last 4 to 5 years all across Europe with Eurosport, where we have a sports player like ESPN Plus. We own almost all the golf in the world outside of the U.S., most of the cycling outside of the U.S., and we have entertainment and factual all across Europe.
Breaking news very quickly. Let's just take a look at this. These are shots, the live shots we're watching right now as Carlos Ghosn is walking into the area where he'll be holding the press conference in about 10 minutes' time. Can't see him over the cameras that are being held up to go through, but this again is Carlos Ghosn arriving in Beirut in Lebanon, where he'll be holding this press conference. The first time he'll be speaking since he was arrested in Japan back in the fall of 2018. We expect to hear more from him very soon.
And this is turning into a bit of a.
You can't even see him over the reporters.
You can't really see him over the reporters. My understanding is that there's over 30 people there. 30 journalists, maybe more. I don't know, maybe we'll get a shot of them there.
Michelle Caruso Cabrera is in the room. She's there monitoring all of this and joins us right now on the phone. Michelle.
Hey there, Becky. Yeah, I can't even see him myself. I'm in the back here, and it's easily more than 100 reporters. 122 outlets requested to be here, and it is a crush of people. They're allowing the photographers to stand at the beginning as he walks in the room, and then we're told that everybody's going to have to leave. You can imagine there's intense interest because the story spans 3 different continents, right? between Asia, Europe, and the United States, with the Nissan being headquartered in Japan, Renault in France, and also the ADRs of Nissan trading in the United States, plus just the incredible nature of this escape from the Japanese justice system. And you can hear everybody yelling behind me in various languages, in French and Arabic, etc., because they want all the reporters to sit down so they can actually get some video of Carlos Ghosn as he's apparently in the room. And even though I'm in here, I can't see him yet.
I believe I saw his wife, Carol, just sit down in the front. I'm not entirely sure, but I believe she's there too. Michelle, what do you know the format for this? Will questions be allowed to be asked, or is he just going to be speaking and issuing statements?
We assume that questions are going to be asked. We're not sure at this point, though, exactly how it's going to go down, how long it's going to last. We assume, and I heard Phil's report earlier, that we assume that he's going to be very fiery, very defensive, go on the offense, and clearly meant to discredit the Japanese legal system and also the investigations that Renault and Nissan into what they are accusing him of hiding his income and perhaps mixing and the mingling of both personal finances and finances with the company. Those are their allegations. There he is. I can see him. And you can hear all of the photographers in the back behind me screaming, please sit down so they can get their shots.
Phil LeBeau is standing by too, and Phil, again, this will be the first time that he's speaking since he was arrested in Tokyo. We don't anticipate necessarily that he'll give us any details about how he escaped Tokyo, how he got out of Japan and was able to arrive in Lebanon.
He won't. He won't. If he does, I will be shocked. I'll be 100% shocked. I know that's what everybody wants to know, but that's unlikely what he's going to say. And you guys, by the way, wrap me up if at some point he starts to talk or we're told that he's about to talk here. I will be curious, as Michelle is in the room there, how many questions he takes from journalists and how pointed those questions will be. This has been a very controlled event by the Ghosn family, as well as their representatives, their crisis management team. So the questions, I will be curious from the journalists who are there, how pointed will they get? How much will they push Carlos Ghosn, so to speak? Or is this going to be a case where he's going to riff? And we know that Carlos can riff. I've seen him lose his temper, not often, but I've seen it. And if he gets really fired up, you can see him go.
There are over 120 journalists in the room, as Michelle said.
And everybody. It's going to be probably a multi-language news conference, right? I mean, already they're giving directives in French and Japanese and Arabic and English. I hope it's mostly in English because we're not going to have live translation if he does it in other languages. But I assume that will be the case.
Michelle, also, with the 120 journalists there, even if some journalists get to ask questions, probably not all 120-plus journalists will get to ask questions. It'll be interesting to see which journalists he chooses.
This was originally described as a roundtable, and so it sounded like there was going to be a lot of interaction with the press. Obviously, they had so much demand, they had to let many more journalists than they anticipated, and therefore the format has changed since the original planning occurred. But yes, I assume he's got to take questions, or else why do you bring all these people together? And if you're trying to clear your name, part of that is standing up to credible and pointed questions, to Phil's point, and answering them directly.
You know, Phil, one of the things we've talked about is if there is not a trial to be held in Japan, would there be a trial held in Lebanon? I guess the question becomes, would people look at that as a fair and balanced court, or would there be questions raised about that too?
I think, Becky, if there is a trial in Lebanon, and maybe Michelle can talk about this, people will view it as a fair trial only to the extent that Japan prosecutors participate. And there is a good chance that Japanese prosecutors, if there is a trial in Lebanon, would say, no, you don't get to call the shots. I want, or we want to have access, and we want to do it under Japanese law because these are violations that we believe happened in Japan, or at least some of them happened in Japan. So I think that answers your question, Becky. It depends on whether or not Japan would play along, and I think there's a big question about whether they would do that.
Michelle?
I would be shocked if he faces trial at this point. But start beginning to learn and understand the differences between the Japanese legal system and the U.S. legal system has been incredibly interesting. I spoke with two different U.S. civil attorneys yesterday who said that if they had clients like Carlos Ghosn, they would encourage the same thing and get out of Japan because the sense of due process in Japan is very different than what it is in the United States in terms of discovery, in terms of being able to question your accusers. There's no such thing as Miranda rights in Japan. By the way, there's no such thing as Miranda rights in most parts of the world. The right to remain silent is very, very American. And a lot of the concepts that we take for granted in the United States do not exist in other parts of the world and not in Japan. One of the other questions that was raised about the Japanese process is that they are, it's more about a process of trying to rehabilitate and reintegrate the person into Japanese society. And that is why there's such a focus on confession and what we call it coercion. There they call it, the first step is admitting that you have a problem. And then after you are willing to do that, they give out more lenient sentences as a result. It's a completely different way to look at prosecution. To Americans, it would look like you are presumed guilty in advance, the way the thinking goes and the way that we are raised with this idea of universal and individual rights in the United States.
Having said that, Andrew brought up a good point this morning. What about his business partner who is still there and still in prison in Japan? What does he now face? And I'll ask you first about that, Michelle.
I mean, I'm speculating, but I would guess that he's got to feel like he was really hung out to dry, that he was left behind, and that this process of getting Carlos Ghosn out of the country did not include him. Who knows what's happened between the two individuals since they were both accused and imprisoned, but it's really it's very, very different outcome for those two gentlemen.
I was just going to ask one other question, which is, I imagine, and I don't know if, and I know Phil doesn't think he's going to speak to the issue of the escape and fleeing of Japan, but to the extent that he touches on it, I imagine one of the things he might say is that his wife had nothing to do with it, that his other members of his family had nothing to do with it, his lawyers had nothing to do with it. And the question is, almost in advance, is that plausible? Is that credible? How would that possibly happen, given the, as we've called it, the Ocean's 11 style efforts that seem to have gone on to get him out of the country?
Right. I think that's a very good question. So on the one hand, if you're him, maybe you want to give all those people plausible deniability and not include them from the beginning. If you don't tell your lawyers, so that way your lawyers can't tell you not to do it, and it's against their advice. When you read the details about his incarceration, they indicated he was able to speak on a phone as long as it was a smartphone. So it's possible he could do communication. It looks like they're getting started here, guys, and I'm being asked to shush, so I'm going to have to let you go.
Okay, we are still awaiting Carlos Ghosn to start speaking here, but obviously they're doing some introductions ahead of time. Yes, Phil?
I wanted to point out, you see what looks like an overhead projector there?
Yes.
And I know I'm dating myself saying an overhead projector, but it looks like they're going to show some documents, which will be interesting. This could be the beginning of Carlos Ghosn saying, you know what, they said X, Y, and Z, and this is what I have to show that what they claim is BS. And so that's just
what's still like, I'm still here, and yes, there is an overhead projector set up. There is an overhead projector set up at the front of the room.
Yes. So I suspect we're going to see some documents. Now, whether or not those are convincing documents, this looks like this is Carlos Ghosn saying, all right, at a minimum, I've got one chance to speak, and I'm going to start throwing out my evidence to show that I was wrongly accused.
Hey, Michelle, is there a Japanese press in the room?
Oh, yes.
There's a lot of Japanese, and the question is, is he going to take questions from the Japanese press? Because I imagine that their questions may be the most pointed, perhaps.
We'll wait and see. I think that's a very good observation. Yes, I would like to know the same thing, and we're going to watch it here all unfold. The question is, are they going to ask them in English or in Japanese?
Right. Again, we are watching the introductions ahead of this speaking engagement, this press conference that's being hosted by Carlos Ghosn, the first time that he's going to be speaking since he was first taken into custody in Japan in the fall of 2018. Just last week, escaping Tokyo, leaving and taking off for Lebanon, which is where he is now. He's being introduced right now and looks like he's about to take the stand. Jeff Sonnenfeld from the Yale School of Management is here with us as well. And Jeff, we'll have to stop as soon as they start talking. But your thoughts on what to anticipate here?
Well, I think there's a real conflict of goals here between Carlos Ghosn's message and what the international press wants to hear. The international press and many of us sitting around the table are fascinated by the Bonnie Parker, Clyde Barrow, Bonnie and Clyde type escape issue here, where in fact that's the last thing he wants to talk about. He wants to scream, as Phil was saying.
He's stepping up to the podium now. Let's listen into Carlos Ghos.
I want to thank you for taking the time to be here, with many of you traveling great distances to join me. Ça, c'est le seul endroit où je vais parler en plusieurs langues. Je voudrais aussi saluer nos amis de la presse française qui nous ont rejoints. وأنا حابب كمان سلم على كل أصدقاء اللبنانية. أنا اليوم فخور كون لبناني لأنه إذا في بلد بالعالم وقف معي بهالصعوبات هو لبنان. As you can imagine, today is a very important day for me. One, that I have looked forward to every single day for more than 400 days, since I was brutally taken from my world as I knew it, ripped from my family, my friends, my communities, from Renault, Nissan, and Mitsubishi, and the 450,000 women and men who comprise those companies. I have not experienced a moment of freedom since November 19, 2018. It is impossible to express the depth of that deprivation and my profound appreciation to once again be able to be reunited with my family and loved ones. Today is also a poignant reminder of the day precisely 1 year ago when I appeared before many of you, as well as a Japanese judge and prosecutors in Tokyo. I pleaded my innocence by I did so while constrained by handcuffs and bound by a leash around my waist, which was used to walk me into the courtroom. I was in the midst of being held indefinitely in solitary confinement after several failed attempts at bail. I had just spent the Christmas and New Year holiday alone and in confinement, and I hadn't spoken to or seen my family for 6 weeks. My only contact with them were letters shown to me by lawyers through a looking glass. I had spent the previous months being interrogated for up to 8 hours a day without any lawyers present, without an understanding of what exactly I was being accused of, without access to the evidence that justify this travesty against my human rights and dignity. It will get worse for you if you don't just confess, the prosecutor told me repeatedly, and this has been taped. You can look at the tapes because the tapes are being held. You can see how many times they came up about, you just confess and it will be over. And if you don't confess, not only we're going to go after you, we're going to go after your family. And we're going to discover many things. Every day I woke up on nights that I was able to sleep and to make a decision. Do I fight for my innocence or do I do as they say? And there was no end in sight. And those conditions remained more or less the same day after day, week after week, month after month. The feeling of hopelessness was profound. And every day for over 130 days in detention, I fought for my innocence. When I was finally granted bail for the first time and saw the opportunity to share with you all what I intend to share today, I I was ruthlessly thrown back in solitary confinement within 24 hours, a confinement that flies in the face of global and United Nations standards of justice. This is why today is such an important occasion for me. I'm not here to talk about how I managed to leave Japan, although I can understand that you are interested in that. I'm here to talk about why I left. For the first time since this nightmare began, I can defend myself, speak freely, and answer your questions. It was very easy to beat on me while I was in prison. It was very, very easy to describe me the way I was described. Unfortunately, not only in Japan. But now I'm going to be able to speak with facts and data and evidence, and hopefully you will discover the truth, not as it has been travestied by the people who are accusing me, or the people who join this accusation, or the accomplices, not only in Japan, but outside Japan. But the reality is very different, and hopefully today you're going to discover it with me. I'm not here to victimize myself. I'm here to shed light on a system that violates the most basic principles of humanity. I'm here to clear my name and to pronounce clearly and emphatically something that was interpreted as a heresy in the Japanese judicial system. These allegations are untrue, and I should have never been arrested in the first place. First, I would like to begin by expressing my profound gratitude to those who supported me during this unspeakable ordeal. In the face of a systematic campaign by a handful of malevolent actors to destroy my reputation and impugn my character. I'm grateful beyond words for the steadfast love and support of my family, my wife, Carol, my 4 children, my 3 sisters, my mother, Rose, Carol's children and family. They all endured unimaginable pain. They learned of my arrest and solitary confinement through the media. They were barred from seeing me or even speaking to me for months. They were targeted by relentless, shameless, baseless media attacks orchestrated by Japanese prosecutors, Nissan executives, and unfortunately many accomplices. I think of my supportive friends, as well as the numerous anonymous individuals who sent me letters of support while I was in the detention center of Kosuge. I think of the Lebanese authorities and citizens who never lost their faith in me. They showed the world that for a small country, Lebanese people have a big soul, they have a big heart, and the true sense of righteousness. I think of my lawyers around the globe who wage a valiant battle, putting their career on the line and devoting their full energy against a corrupt and hostile system that presumed my guilt from day one and was designed to break my spirit and coerce my confession. I also want to thank the human rights and criminal justice advocates globally, and particularly in Japan, who have fought tirelessly against insuperable odds to improve Japan's anachronistic and inhumane system of hostage justice. It is a system that is indifferent to the truth, indifferent to fairness and process, indifferent to fundamental civil liberties and accepted norms of justice. I also want to take a moment to mention Greg Kelly, an honorable man, husband and father, who was brutally torn from his word and his family on that November day, summoned to Tokyo under false pretenses by Harinada when he needed to stay home for an important surgery. Greg remains a victim of the Japanese hostage justice system with no trial date in sight 14 months after his arrest. While my plight has captured the headlines, we and you cannot forget Greg's ordeal. and the pain he and family endure each day at the hands of the Japanese system. He is being punished precisely because he is honorable and refused to participate in a suspicious pre-bargaining agreement alongside Harinada and Onuma and probably many others. Thanks to the systematic leaking of false information and distorted information, and the intentional withholding of exculpatory information by the prosecutor and by Nissan, I was presumed guilty before the eyes of the world and subject to a system whose only objective is to coerce confessions, secure guilty pleas without regard to the truth. I have come to learn that my unimaginable ordeal over the past 14 months is the result of a handful of unscrupulous, vindictive individuals at Nissan, at the Latam and Watkins law firm, with the support of the Tokyo Prosecutor Office. It is important for me to emphasize that I'm not above the law, and I welcome the opportunity for the truth to come out and to have my name vindicated and my reputation restored. I did not escape justice. I fled injustice and persecution, political persecution. Having endured more than 400 days of inhumane treatment in a system designed to break me and unwilling to provide me even minimal justice, I was left with no other choice but to protect myself and my family. It was a difficult decision and a risk one only takes if resigned to the impossibility of a fair trial. With the strings being pulled and manipulated by those dead set on securing a confession or a conviction whose only goal is to save face. The facts, the truth, justice are irrelevant to these individuals. This was the most difficult decision of my life, but let us not forget that I was facing a system where the conviction rate is 99.4%. And I will bet you that this number is much higher for the foreigners. The legitimacy of a justice system should not rest on its conviction rate, but instead on the confidence that it searches for and honors truth and dispenses fair and just outcomes. It is the prosecutors, aided and abetted by petty, vindictive and lawless individuals in government at Nissan and the Latam law firm, who have destroyed and are destroying Japan's reputation on the global stage. It is them who are fueling an archaic, manipulative, arbitrary side to an otherwise modern country. It is them who should be held accountable. The charges against me are baseless. Why do you think the prosecutors have leaked false information to the press against the Japanese law? Why have they intentionally concealed exculpatory evidence that support my innocence? We're going to see it. Why have they continually delayed the still undetermined, 13 months after, the still undetermined trial date, and extended relentlessly the investigation timeline? Why have they rearrested me and seized all my legal defense documents? Why were they so intent on preventing me from talking and holding a press conference where I would set forth the facts and my side of the story? Why have they spent 14 months trying to break my spirit, banning me from all contact with my wife, and surveying my every move? Let me, before going to your question, and I know you have many, try to give you some answer. And I'm going to follow particularly 5 topics. The first topic is why all of this happened. At the beginning, why all of this happened. The second is, how did it happen? I'm going to tell you a little bit of what I've been through for 14 months. Third is, we're going to come back to the 4 charges that the prosecutor have put on me. And and I'm going to explain to you the charges. We're going to also talk about all the charges that have been at the base of what I call the smear campaign, that the prosecutor didn't dare even put them in the accusation, but they are flying through the media with many fantasist interpretation, and unfortunately with some official position which are absolutely not rigorous on them. And finally, I'm going to do some words about the lines Renault and Nissan. Where are they today, 1 year later? What is the situation of these three entities 1 year later? And then I will let you answer all your questions. So let me start with the first item, which is why? Okay? If we say, okay, this is a plot, and this is something which has been organized, why? What are the reasons for this? Well, we have two reasons. There are probably many, but I'm going to give you the main one. The two main reasons for this to happen. The first one was the fact that Nissan performance unfortunately started to decline at the beginning of 2017. I will remind you that in October 2016, I have decided to remove myself from the operation of Nissan because I signed the deal with Mitsubishi, taking control of 34% of Mitsubishi, and Mitsubishi needed help. So I moved to Mitsubishi as chairman of the board, as future chairman of the board, to support Masuko-san into reviving this company. And I told Saikawa-san, okay, we're going to propose you as co-CEO. Yeah, but this is also something we should say. The CEOs are not named by their predecessor. They are named by the board. They are proposed by the predecessor, but it is the board decision. So when people say, oh, Monsieur Bolloré was named by Mr. Ghosn, wrong. Mr. Bolloré was named by the board. He was proposed by Carlos Ghosn, but he was named by the board. So when they say, oh, he was named by Mr. Ghosn, that means he has no legitimacy, it's dead wrong. It's not factual. The members of the board of Renault voted unanimously to nominate him as CEO. And 9 months later, that unanimously voted him down. That's the reality. So let's come back to our story about Saikawa. Nominated in October 2016, CEO of the company. I moved to Mitsubishi. I told him, now it's your turn. I promised that one day I will return this company after having been CEO for 17 years. After having been CEO for 17 years of a dead company in 1999. I left with him $20 billion in cash. A company which was profitable, which was growing, which was respected. A brand which was nowhere in 1999, which became one of the top 60 brands in the world. That's what I left with him. I told him, you take care of it, now it's your turn. Let me help Mitsubishi, let me take care of Renault, and let me take care of the lines. Unfortunately, a CEO is here as long as he performs. I mean, I didn't stay 17 years head of Nissan because I was Carlos Ghosn. I was there only because I was performing. I was delivering growth, I was delivering profit, I was delivering cash flow, I was delivering dividends. That's our reason to be. Unfortunately, we started in 17 to see a decline in the performance of the company. Obviously, many tough discussions. In 2018, another decline, many tough discussions. But at the same time, he was the CEO and he was responsible for it. So he has to find a solution with his own team. So there was some nervousness in the ranks of the top management, and particular ranks in the top management, that at a certain point in time, patience will run out and change will come. That's number one. Number two, well, we have to come back to the history of the lines. There was a famous Florange law in France that has been voted, given double voting rights for the shareholders who have more than 2 years. We, as board of Renault, opposed this rule. And we have the right, because the law allowed us, if there is more than 2/3 of the shareholders voting to pass over this rule, it was possible. We didn't prevail because, as you know, the French state increased its stake into the company, blocked the majority of 2/3. We have most of the shareholders with us, but we were not able to reach the 2/3 of the shares. This left a big bitterness with our friends in Japan. Not only with the management of Nissan, but also with the governments of Japan. This left a big taste because somehow they consider that it is unfair that Nissan, who owns 15% of shares in Renault, has zero voting right, and that the French state, which owns 15% of Renault, has double voting rights. We tried to explain it. We were not successful, unfortunately. And this is where the problem started. Because there started to be some kind of defiance from our Japanese colleagues, not only about the lines, but also about me, particularly when I've been asked before renewing my mandate, which, by the way, I didn't ask for. I was ready to retire before June 2018. I was asked that I was probably the best person to continue for the next step of the lines. And unfortunately, I accepted this offer. And probably one of the reasons for which I'm in this situation today is because I accepted this offer to continue to integrate the two companies, converge the two companies, always respecting the autonomy of each company, because this is a management belief that you're not going to make a strong company with people who are thinking they are second-rate citizens in a big organization. I want the Japanese to be proud of Alliance. I want Renault to be proud of the Alliance. I didn't want a first-rate citizen and a second-rate citizen. I want each company to be totally, and there was a system, I proposed a system to maintain that, even though I made the Alliance irreversible. Unfortunately, there was no trust. And some of our Japanese friends thought the only way to get rid of the influence of Renault on Nissan is to get rid of me, which unfortunately they were right, because when you see exactly what's happening today, where Renault has very little influence on what's going on in Nissan, even though they put a nice face on what's taking place, you know exactly that the Japanese have the right analysis by saying, we get rid of him, we will get much more autonomy for Nissan. Unfortunately, as you know, we're going to talk about the results. The results that were expected are not the one that everybody was hoping for. So, who are the people? I promised you a name. I'm going to give you names. Okay? Who was part of the plot? Obviously, Saikawa is part of the plot. Harinada is part of the plot, obviously, and Onuma, because they showed. But there are many other people. Toyoda, member of the board, was the link between the board of Nissan, and the authorities. Now, I can talk about what happens in the government of Japan. I can give you names, I know them. But I am in Lebanon, I respect Lebanon, and I respect the hospitality that has been extended to me by the authorities in Lebanon. And in no way I want to do anything or say anything that would make their task more difficult. So I'm imposing on myself silence on this part of the presentation, because in no way I want to show anything or say anything that would hurt the interest of the Lebanese people or the Lebanese government. So I will stop there for the government. Kawaguchi, Imazu, chief auditor, Toyoda, these are the main people. Obviously, there are many other people participating to it, but I have all the names. I'm limiting to the main people who are involved. The prosecutor, I will mention some of the names. You're going to have the people who have been from all the sides of the fences, like the lawyer company, LW, that Nissan, that we were using in the past and continue to help Nissan, even though attacking some of the advice that they have given us when we were in charge, and now they are supporting the new team. So the story is very long, but I'm going to limit myself. How? Decline of the performance of Nissan, suspicion about the next step of the irreversibility of the lines. These are the two reasons for which this happened. How? I was arrested on November 19, 2018. I didn't suspect anything. And I didn't suspect anything because I was not anymore the CEO of the company, I was chairman. And now I delegate. Some people ask me, oh my God, that means you didn't look at this, you didn't mention this, you didn't suspect this. And it happened that it was a colleague, one of your colleagues from the US, and I say, You know, what happened in Pearl Harbor? Did you see Pearl Harbor happening? Did you see Pearl Harbor happening? Did you notice what happened in Pearl Harbor? You know, so you're telling me, you're asking me how did I notice? And I was not even in my country that something like this was being cooked against me. And you're telling me how I didn't notice? I didn't notice it. And I didn't notice it because it is true that when it's planned and it's confidential and it's secret, well, it happens. And you'll be surprised. And I was surprised. There was a stage arrest. I've been told, I didn't know, that the word was led to know that I was arrested in the airplane. Bullshit. I was arrested in the airport. I came down from the airplane. I was taken in a car. I arrived to the passport. They told me there's a problem with my visa. They took me in a small room, and this is where I found Seki, prosecutor, telling me, I'm from the prosecutor office, I need to talk to you. And since then say, you cannot use anymore your phone, and I know I was arrested, and I understand what's going on. And because I was surprised, I told them, okay, can I at least give a phone call to Nissan to send a lawyer? Well, obviously I didn't know that Nissan was behind it. And it was all staged way before between the prosecutor and the company. This is the way it happened. And from there, they took me to Kosuge Detention Center. It took 5 hours between my arrest and me finding myself into a tiny cell in Kosuge. The collusion between Nissan and the prosecutor is everywhere. The only people who don't see it, maybe, are the people in Japan. They don't see this collusion. And I've been told this is totally illegal. How can it be illegal? And at the same time, we have so many traces, so many hands on the wall, and nobody's talking about them. Well, you don't see if you don't want to see. But the collusion between Nissan and the prosecutor is coming through witnesses who were in the headquarters of Nissan, who told me exactly what happened before I was arrested, all the preparation, all the visits, a lot of the meeting that took place between the prosecutors and Nissan, at least without counting officials. And I'm not going to talk about the official, as I said. So I was sent to the prison, and the prosecutor told me, well, we're going to arrest you for under-reporting your compensation. I was shocked at the beginning. Frankly, I couldn't understand that. I said, what compensation? And they say, yeah, we are arresting you for under-reporting a compensation that was not paid to you. Second surprise. Okay, so we're talking about something which was not paid for me. Yes. And then something which didn't go to the board, which means that it did not decided. So I was arrested for a compensation that was not fixed, that was not decided, and that was not paid. This is the reason of my arrest. This is the reason of my arrest. Well, I can tell you that in many countries, there is no reason to arrest. It's certainly not a criminal case. It's certainly not even an offense. Give you a name you know very well. Tanaka-san, professor of corporate law, Tokyo University, consulted 3 weeks ago by my lawyers. They put everything. Now that we have the documents, at least on the first charge from the prosecutor, again, 13 months after the arrest, we showed him everything. And we told him, Professor, please tell us. He said, I'm quoting him, it is a shame that Japan arrested Mr. Gon for this. So we asked him to write, and he's going to write. Obviously, I don't know if he's going to continue to write it now. But he said, it's a shame, Professor Tanaka, University of Tokyo, corporate law. It's a shame that Mr. Gon was arrested for this. Let me continue. So, let me talk to you, and a little bit, I'm not going to talk too much about it. 130 days in prison, solitary confinement, tiny cell without window, light day and night. 30 minutes per day, excluding weekend, because obviously there is not enough guard in the weekend. You can't go for 30 minutes outside. When there is a holiday, there is nobody. So you stay in your cell, you just get your food. For example, 6 days without any human contact during the New Year break. Shower twice a week. Tried to ask to have more, they said no. Prescribed medication is forbidden. You can get only the medicine from the prison. Interrogated days and night. It can happen in the morning, in the afternoon, at night, up to 8 hours, obviously without the presence of a lawyer. All of this is taped. Impossible to take to anyone. No one speaks English or French or anything. When we need something important, we have to bring somebody, and this guy is available once a week. Presumption of guilt prevailed. Prosecutor from the beginning, they let me to know you're guilty. Don't play games, confess. And everything they were asking me is not to try to discover the truth, is to try to find reason to make sure that their accusation will be stronger. So I felt from the beginning that there was no interest into finding the truth. There was interest into trying to build a very strong case against me. And sent back to prison the day before the press conference to stop me from speaking out. Which is interesting is that after I was bailed out the second time, a new prosecutor in Japan has been nominated, and he was interviewed by the Japanese media. And Japanese media said, Mr. Prosecutor, why do you forbid Mr. Gon to talk to the press? He said, oh, no, we don't. We don't. He can't talk to the press. But we also can bring new charges. Which was a very simple message that, okay, yes, sure, he can talk to the press. But watch, and we can bring new charges. And they're very good at bringing charges because, as you know, yesterday, what a coincidence. Yesterday, obviously they can't put me back in prison, but they put a warrant arrest for my wife yesterday. On what? On declaration she made 9 months ago in front of the judge and with the prosecutor. And what is the reason? They said, oh, we suspect she said something which was wrong. 9 months later? You discovered this 9 months later? 1 day before this press conference? What a coincidence. What a coincidence. This is exactly the way it works. You talk, you go back to Kosugi. 9 months separated from my wife without any motive. Carol has a lot of courage. After I've been arrested, she left the country. Prosecutor asked her, why are you leaving the country? Well, obviously, they took her passport. They were very threatening. They left her without a telephone. They got her computer. She was left alone in Tokyo without anything. She left because she was afraid. But then when they started to say, oh, she has something to hide, she came back. 4 days later, she flew back. They interrogated her in front of the court with the judge and the prosecutor. And then she left. And now they're issuing a warrant for false testimony 9 months later. Let me give you another example. The judge in charge of the bail condition, Hajime Shimada, we asked him 7 times to remove the ban over a period of 9 months. 7 times. And every time he took the time to think, nothing changed, huh? And then he came back by saying no. And why no? Because tampering of evidence. Tampering of evidence for Carol. But I was able to receive my sisters. I was able to receive my kids. I was able to receive my cousins, my friends. So if I was intending to tamper evidence, I could tamper evidence with anybody. Why Carol? Because they knew that by not allowing me to have a normal life, they were breaking me. And which is interesting is when we tell Shimada-san, maybe they can meet from time to time under your control. And the question was very interesting. It was saying, why do they want to meet? And we said, okay, how about a Zoom, a conference? He said, what do they want to talk about? I felt like I was not a human anymore. I was something between a human, an animal, or an object. I mean, there is no feeling that a man and a woman who are married want to talk together, and I have to explain why I have to talk to my wife? They didn't care. And the answer, as you know, was no. And I had the right for 2 hours in 9 months, with a lawyer present in the room, and the poor guy was embarrassed. He just tell me, please excuse me, I have to be here, and I have to report about what did you say to your wife. That's what you're talking about. The second one that I would like to mention also, I mentioned I had many pre-trial sessions. In the pre-trial session, you have the prosecutor, you have the defense, and you have the judge. 3 judges. Well, was naive. I thought that the judge was a boss. Well, I was wrong. prosecutor. The judge, Kenji Shimotsu, very nice guy, very polite, but the prosecutor did whatever they want. When they were late, they say, we're sorry, we're late, we're busy. When they ask, why don't you bring this document this date? They say, we're going to think about it. Then the date comes, they say, we're late, we're not giving it. And why all of this? Try as much as possible to delay the trial. And when I left Japan, I still did not have a date for the first charge, didn't have a date for the first charge. Then they came with the idea about saying, oh, we cannot put all the trials at the same time. You have to finish the first charge before we start the second one. So when I asked my lawyers about how much time is all of this going to take, saying, we're afraid you're going to be maybe 5 years in Japan before I get a judgment. 5 years in Japan. This is, I understand, we have Maître Zimri, who is here, who is a specialist in human rights. Speedy trial is one of the basic and most fundamental rights of any human being, part of the Treaty of Human Rights. Well, I was far from a speedy trial. On the contrary, I had the impression that it can take as much time as possible, and, you know, with the judge being a kind of nice organizer of the whole things, and the prosecutor calling the shots. 99.4% conviction rate. All the signs that there was no way I was going to be treated fairly. No sign that I will have a normal life for the next 4 or 5 years. So I can tell you, that means it's not very difficult to come to conclusion. You're going to die in Japan or you're going to have to get out. This was not about justice. This was, as I felt, I was the hostage of a country that I have served for 17 years. I dedicated my professional life. I was proud of it. I revived a company that nobody else before me was able to do. For 10 years, they were in the dirt. I brought them. For 17 years, I was considered as a role model in Japan. More than 20 books of management were written about me. And like this, in a minute, all of a sudden, a few prosecutors and a bunch of executives in Nissan said, you know what? This guy is a cold, greedy dictator. That's what I said. Cold, greedy dictator. We filed motion to dismiss because of all the elements that the prosecutor violated. Obviously, this motion is still being analyzed. And then there is an endless search for new charges by the prosecutor. So in a certain way, you know, I think we have the list. Yeah, we have here the list of all the prosecutor misconducts that have been presented with evidence and with facts and with data and with name and with testimony that were presented to the court just to ask for the case to be dismissed. But my lawyers in Japan told me, you know, don't think that it will be dismissed. There is zero case in Japan where whatever is the reason of dismissal, a case was dismissed. Some people were acquitted, as part of the 0.6% left, but there is zero case of dismissal. Let me go now to the accusation. The first accusation is the underreporting. This is the main accusation for which I was arrested. Again, amount of money not fixed, not decided, not paid. What's interesting also, I'm going to give you some interesting facts, is that Nissan pleaded guilty in Japan by saying, oh, we're sorry, we're going to provision 9 billion yen recently, and we're going to plead guilty in Japan. And the India has to pay a fine. Good citizen. The problem is that in Tennessee, where there is a lawsuit against them, they took the opposite position. Their lawyer said, well, we're not guilty, there is no reason, And this document is available for you. In Japan, we're guilty, that's what Nissan says. In Tennessee, they said, we're not guilty. So, this document is available, we are sublined. The key sentences saying that, I just wanted to mention this for you, and we'll come back during the question and answer. And again, there is no democratic country I know where you go for jail for this kind of accusation, even if they were right. Shinsei Bank. Shinsei Bank, there is a resolution from the board. This is a board resolution. Interesting, in the board resolution, everybody voted unanimously for a resolution saying if a foreign director or a foreign officer want to have a contract of exchange rate to cover his income, he can do it at no cost for the company. Who was present? Well, some people you know. Carlos Tavares was member of the board. You have Saikawa, member of the board. They all signed on this. No cost for the company. Very good. I benefited from it. No cost for the company. No cost for the company. No loss for the company. Again, we return by saying, where is the problem? Where is the problem? We continue. Jufali. This is another one. Where they say, Mr. Gon, Jufali didn't do nothing. He received $14.7 million from Nissan on 4 years, but he didn't do nothing. This is the accusation. He didn't do nothing. Well, we have a contract. We found finally, we got the contract about what Jufali was doing. What are the documents that was signed between Jufali and many executives inside Nissan? But particularly, I want to attract your attention to the fact that, there have been a lot of articles saying, CEO reserve. Oh my God, this is a kind of secret money that Carlos Ghosn, opened a safe, has a lot of cash, distributed to his friend. He can do whatever he wants. CEO reserve is a line in the budget. That's what it is. You can access CEO reserve, but it is a line in the budget. It has no payment, it's no cash, it's nothing at all. This is one indication of the CEO reserve. How does it go? You have a vice president asking for the money. In this case, it's Gilles Normand, who was the head of the region. Then he has to explain why he wants the money and what is the contract which is based. And then you have many people reviewing it and agreeing on it or not. Well, obviously you have legal, then you have the controller, then you have the boss of this guy, who usually is the head of the operation, then there is me. Why? Because if it's called CEO reserve, I have to accept that. Every single payment from CEO reserve follow the same procedure. There is not $1 paid from CEO reserve with my signature alone. You have all these people signing on, and after this, after you agree on the budget line, then it has to go for the payment. And when you go for the payment, you have many other people having to sign. Local controller, local vice president, obviously the people receiving the money, etc., etc. So all this farce, talking about CEO reserve as a kind of being special things where Carlos Ghosn was taking money, giving it to his friend, it doesn't stand 1 minute. We have all the evidence showing that. We have all the documents, fortunately now, because when I was arrested, they took everything from me. I had no computer, no file, no in Renault or in Nissan, nothing. Everything was taken. So I have to reconstitute everything to defend myself. And obviously, I'm using here some of the documents that the prosecutor have at the end to deliver to us in order to allow us to defend ourselves. We also, I would like to show you, can we move to Ananda Sas, to the declaration of different people? Yeah. Then we have a lot of statements. Prosecutors in Japan have been visiting many people making statements. Never heard about them. We heard about them because they were obliged to give it to them. One of the important statements is Gilles Normand. Why Gilles Normand? He was the vice president in charge of the Middle East for Nissan. Another one is Joe Peter. Joe Peter was the chief financial officer of Nissan. Another one is Ananda Sas, also another chief financial officer. They covered all these areas. And when we look at what they are saying in all these documents, and these documents are available, you can consult them, and we make them available for those who want to look at them. So when we are looking at that, what do they say? They say the Middle East was an important region for Carlos Ghosn because it is one of the main profit center of Toyota, and it's not one of the main profit center of Nissan. And as you know, the Middle East is practically an Asian country. The cars selling are Japanese cars and Korean cars. And And then obviously you have some Mercedes and BMW, but the European have practically no position in the Middle East, or very weak position. I'm talking particularly about the Gulf. So I want to push the people to say, okay, let's go on the offensive. We have an opportunity, not only in volume, but also in profit. And we need to change the way we do business. We need to innovate in the way we do business. Pushing people to partner with the local dealer, that's what Toyota does. They don't have their own bureaucrats going into the region trying to do what they do. They say, no, we have a good dealer. Let's work with him. Let's give him support. Let's give him incentive. Let him do the job for us. And frankly, it delivered for us. Because every time we did this, we had higher sales and higher profits. All of this is argumented. And the presentation made by the prosecutor is, Mr. Ghani has special ties with the Saudi guy and with Ahmed Bahwan and Suhail Bahwan in Oman. So they had this kind of very cozy relationship. Well, in fact, everything we did with Oman, we did it with Dubai, we did it with Lebanon, we did it with Qatar. They're not talking about the other one. They're just focusing on, these incentives are very big. And what's interesting is when you compare the incentive paid to these people, it's totally normal. And even below the level of incentive that competitors are seeing. But this is something you never heard about. Potential of the Middle East is very important, and that's what we were going after. Ahmed Bahwan, let's go to the next one, has been reviewed by the prosecutor. Never heard about it, huh? He was reviewed by the prosecutor in Japan. He was interrogated for 1 day. Never heard about it. Why? Because obviously he didn't say what they were expecting him to say. He denied all of the accusation. And he denied all the accusation, knowing that obviously nobody's going to believe him. They're going to say, yeah, but if you are accomplice, well, in a certain way, you may say something different than the truth. But you need to know that all the bank accounts, my bank accounts, Bahwan bank accounts, Kumar bank accounts, Jufali bank accounts, have all been swept. All of them. All bank accounts in the world. So if there was any payment which was suspicious, I can tell you, it would be front page of the Nikkei or of the Sankei before it will come directly by the prosecutor. So then people say, okay, so what is the story with Kumar? Well, I say, well, if a breach of trust is there is a money from Nissan going from Nissan and ended up with you, well, there is no money from Nissan because the money in Nissan stops at Suhail Bahwan Automotive, period. And Kumar has nothing to do with it. And we have all the evidence of that there was absolutely no transfer indicating that there was any money from Nissan benefiting Kumar. So, end of the road. There's no breach of trust, because breach of trust is there is money of the company which is benefiting the executive of the company. I'm sure we'll come back on this. So, let's continue on character assassination. This is, I must say that they've been very successful. As you know, Nissan hired a lot of people. I read in Bloomberg recently that they spent more than $200 million for the investigation and for everything around this. $200 million. To get how much money? How much money is that say? They're talking about $14.7 million with Jufali that was paid to Jufali and $5 million for Bahwan. So how rationally you're going to say you're going to spend $200 million? You're going to destroy your company. You're going to destroy your brand. You're going to destroy your image. You're going to divert the attention of all your top management. You're taking a big risk with the alliance. And by the way, the market cap decrease of Nissan since my arrest is more than $10 billion. They lost more than $40 million a day during all this period. By the way, Renault is not better because the market cap of Renault went down since my arrest by more than 5 billion euro, which means 20 million euro a day of quotation. 20 million euro a day. So when I hear a statement made by a French official saying, we need to concentrate on the 11 million euro of undefined expenses, I say, yes, sure. Why don't you come to me? I'll explain to you. Nobody came to me. You make an audit, but the first person that should be, if for the audit to be valid, the contradictory of it, you should come to the main person and ask him the question. If you're not convinced by the question, that's fine. But you even come to me to tell me about the planes, about the help to universities, the help to school. You know, you not come to me and you just say unexplained expenses. I don't worry about these 11 million euro because I have an explanation. I worry as a shareholder of Renault about the fact that I lost 35% of value and I still don't understand why. I worry when Renault goes down by all this amount, the automotive industry is up 12%. So the only companies which went down in market cap for this period of time are, what a coincidence, Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi. And everything else on average went up 12%. So why a company is made? It's what? It's about what? It's about, it's mainly about creation of value, if I remember. A CEO is here for the creation of value. A board is here to protect shareholders. Where are we here? I'm a little bit lost as a shareholder of Renault and a shareholder of Nissan. I say, oh my God, who's protecting me as a shareholder? Who is caring about me? Where is the name of the brand? Where's the future of the brand? Let's go to character assassination. Maybe a big story about Versailles. Versailles. Some people think I'm in prison because of Versailles. No, it's true. I mean, some people say, okay. First Versailles, first accusation, Mr. Ghosn, you make a 15 years anniversary of the alliance in Versailles. Yes, sure. Why Versailles? Versailles is not Louis XIV. Versailles is the most visited site. It's a symbol of the genius that France has. It's a symbol of the opening to the world. If the symbol of the globalization of France, you talk about Versailles, any foreigner will come to Versailles. They're amazed. By the beauty, by the attraction, by the gardens. That's why we sought Versailles. It's not because you want to mimic Louis XIV or you want to mimic Marie Antoinette. It's ridiculous. We made it and they say, oh, this was the party